Hello, friends. Welcome to the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast with David Nichtern on the Be Here Now network. My name's Brett Kane, and I'll be your host and MC for this shared journey that we're about to take. On behalf of Be Here Now and Dharma Moon, we hope that this podcast finds you well and in good spirits. In case you're new to the CSM Podcast, our guide, David Nichtern, leads us on an exploration of how we can best integrate our creative expression, spiritual practice, and right livelihood. In order to do this, David holds conversations with guests who masterfully embody and express these qualities in their own lives. For this episode, we're asking the perennially important question of how can we lead more fulfilling lives? What does it take to have a sustainable sense of meaning while living with the craziness of the modern age? In order to properly answer these questions, David is joined by Emily Esfahani Smith, who is a psychotherapist and author of the book, The Power of Meaning, Finding Fulfillment in a World Obsessed with Happiness. She has articles which have appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal. Her TED Talk, There's More to Life Than Being Happy, has been viewed over a whopping 15 million times. The conversation David and Emily have is one that is incredibly timely as millions of people across the globe struggle tirelessly to try and create a situation in which they can have some sense of a lasting contentment. This is usually encouraged by our society and is often used like a carrot at the end of a stick. It's work like Emily's that reminds us that this approach may be the exact thing that's keeping us from contacting that more sustainable and even sense of fulfillment. So if you appreciate what Emily is bringing to the table, I strongly recommend checking out her book to dive deeper into her work. You can find it wherever you typically buy your books, and we'll also have a link provided in the description. Beyond that, we have some things happening here at Dharma Moon, namely the last 100-hour mindfulness meditation teacher training of the year, which starts on October 10th and runs through January 18th. This is a great opportunity to deepen your own relationship to this profound practice and then learn the skills to share it with your immediate community. As a graduate of this program myself, I can safely say that it is legitimately one of the best things I've ever done for my life. I cannot recommend it enough. If you have some curiosity and would like to learn more, there's going to be a free online talk about becoming a teacher on Tuesday, September 2nd at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This will be led by David and serve as a great primer for this material. All of that can be found over at dharmamoon.com. Last but certainly not least, before we get into the episode, we want to extend a very, very heartfelt thank you to the folks over at the Be Here Now network for helping us out with the production and distribution of this podcast. It's such an incredible opportunity to be a part of their extended podcast family. So if you enjoy this show, head on over to BeHereNowNetwork.com, where you can find more podcasts from some of the world's leading spiritual teachers. They have some folks such as Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein, Raghu Marcus, and so many more. Go check it out. I know you'll love it. And that's going to be it for me this week, everybody. We are moving on to episode 58 of the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast with special guest Emily Esfahani Smith and, of course, David Nichtern.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome Emily Esfahani Smith to our Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast this morning. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be here with you, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're new friends. We met through my partner in Strawberry Moon's Media, our company, and she was taken with your perspective. So thought it might be a good fit with the kind of things that we're often talking about. So we sometimes are talking about very well-established creatives out there in the field, uh, great spiritual teachers, and then also sometimes entrepreneurs who are trying to blend those three. So the person who I wonder if you're aware of is Daniel Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence.
Yes, 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 absolutely.
Okay, so Daniel's a good friend, and your niche, your expression seemed to align with the conversation that I had with him recently, which I think is actually on a podcast, which is about purpose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm
Yeah.
just I wanted to invite you to sort of share your vision about these four pillars that we read about in your book. Maybe first you could tell us the name of the book so that everybody can go out and right away and buy it. That would be great.
The book is called The Power of Meaning, Finding Fulfillment in a World Obsessed with Happiness. So it's all about how we kind of find meaning in our lives.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah. So the conversation you had with Dr. Goldman sounds very kind of kindred spirits to the what's going on in the book.
Yeah, I think he thinks that's the new frontier is purpose and meaning. So, um, can you just share a little bit about your perspective on that?
Yes. So I came to this topic of writing about meaning and purpose when I was studying positive psychology in graduate school. So that was about 10 years ago. And positive psychology, for those who might not know, is the scientific study of well being. So for many years, the field of psychology, clinical psychology, has focused on the what's wrong with us, depression, anxiety, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important to address those things, of course, but there's this movement to also talk about, okay, not just fixing what's wrong, but actually living like a good, meaningful life. Like, how do we get from, let's say, -5 to not just from -5 to 0, but from 0 to 5, if you
Mm-hmm.
kind of think of it that way. And so positive psychology is studying topics like meaning and happiness and creativity, positive relationships, positive communities. So I was really, drawn to the work in this field because I'd always been interested in this question of how do we lead a meaningful life? How do we live a good life? And when I was in that program, diving deeply into the research, I I came upon some research that surprised me. So we we get told a lot in our culture that a good life is a happy life, and that we should pursue happiness. And I certainly, kind of had internalized that perspective. And yet, when I saw this research on happiness, within positive psychology, it showed that, when we pursue happiness in this single minded way that our culture encourages us to do, that we can actually end up feeling unhappy and lonely. And that we just kind of set unrealistic expectations for ourselves about
Mm-hmm.
what a good life should be. And so there was at the same time this body of research emerging on meaning in life. And a lot of this research was comparing and contrasting the meaningful life with the happy life. And
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really thought of them as these distinct paths to well-being, to a good life. But the more I got into the research, the more I saw, wait a minute, maybe it's not happiness that we should be pursuing and glorifying, but maybe it's this concept of leading a meaningful life.
Mm.
So, if you think about happiness, like the happiness is about feeling good. If you're in a happy mood, party, you're celebrating the things that are associated with happiness in this type of research is, playing video games or sleeping in, enjoying yourself, those kinds of things, like these momentary, uh, positive emotional states. Meaning, though, is bigger. So it's about connecting and contributing to something beyond yourself. So that could be the work that you do. That could be some spiritual practice. your family, a lot of ways to kind of experience that self-transcendence that's part of meaning. And in research, meaningful activities are these types of activities like, volunteering, taking care of somebody, practicing a musical instrument, studying. So things that are not necessary, so things that are kind of hard and don't necessarily make us happy in the moment, but that bring depth to our lives. So that was the premise of the book. That's where I started.
Well, of course, some of these things have to do with how you define terms, because obviously
Yes.
happiness is used. Um, the art of happiness. The Dalai Lama, for example, talks about if you want to be happy. I mean, I think in that tradition they combine happiness and meaning. If you want to
Yes.
be
Yes.
happy, for example, they say, work for the benefit of others. If you want to be
Hmm.
miserable, be self-centered. So
Yes.
I take you to mean that you're talking about like a kind of happy face, happy pill, kind of superficial, temporary happiness,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out, because yes, definitely have been there are many definitions of happiness out there, some more superficial, some with more depth, like the concept that you brought up with the Dalai Lama. I I use I define happiness as a positive mental and emotional state, that's kind of subjective, temporary feeling state, because that's how it's mostly defined in psychology research. And it's how it's kind of defined more broadly in our popular culture, like big yellow
Sure.
happy face.
Yeah.
So yes. So that when I'm talking about happiness that isn't, as satisfying to us long term, that's the kind of happiness I'm,
Right.
I'm referring to.
And you could say, like, from a Buddhist perspective, for example, that actually what they talk about is the cessation of suffering,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is another take on it. Um, that you remove the habitual patterns, the source code
Yes.
of a sense of dis-ease, dissatisfaction. Those things have definable causes, and by removing those imprints, then you have freedom. So in other
Yes.
words, that's another word to get in there. It's like how much freedom does somebody have, or how much are they stuck with their the kind of happiness you're talking about could be addiction, even, right? And I have ice cream at night, it makes me happy, but then I'm gaining weight and I'm feeling not so healthy.
Right. Yes. No, I think that idea of kind of freedom, having being in a mental and emotional state where you are making decisions that align, with your values, as opposed to being kind of pressured by external or even internal influences.
Okay, yeah.
Like, yeah, yes.
So you have four pillars that are sort of your framework for talking about this. Would you mind sharing those with everybody?
Right. So I was curious about, meaning is this kind of big topic. It's hard to get your arms around it.
Sure.
People might say they want to lead a meaningful life. It's a universal yearning, but what does that exactly look like? What does it mean? And that's when that's what took me to this idea of the four pillars. I wanted to understand, are there certain principles that we could all rely upon, draw upon to kind of build more meaning into our lives?
Mm,
Or is leading a meaningful life just something that we each have to figure out on our own? I
right.
mean, for a lot of people, there is kind of, a blueprint for leading a meaningful life. If you have a spiritual practice, religious practice that you're committed to, some people, within their communities and find meaning in the rituals and traditions. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, in modern society, those structures that used to give people's lives meaning are no longer as central as they were. And so that leaves people with this yearning for meaning, but no clear way to satisfy it. And so I wanted clarity. And so that's what brought me to the four pillars. And I, looked at all the research, religious writing, spiritual writing, philosophy, psychology research. I interviewed a lot of people. And what I saw was that there were these themes that came up over and over again about, what people what makes people's lives meaningful. So when people were talking to me about what makes their lives meaningful, or when I was looking at the research and seeing what the research said, there seemed to be this pattern that emerged of four things. So the first is having a sense of belonging. So, really feeling like you're part of a community or in relationship where you are valued for who you are intrinsically. The second is purpose. So that more kind of goal oriented part of meaning. Like, what is your life driving towards?
Would that include
That
goals? Setting goals?
Yes, definitely, definitely. So,
Okay.
like, you want to make sure you're setting goals that are aligned with your values, that are kind of emanating and, intrinsic to you, as opposed to, goals that like the culture is, saying that you should be pursuing. So goals, yes, goals is very central. So if you think of purpose as like this forward pointing arrow that, directs your life and organizes the things that you do. In terms of the third pillar, it's this something I call transcendence. So this really has to do with kind of the more spiritual dimension of life, how we contact or feel in contact with something much bigger than ourselves. So, it could be nature, could be God, could be, collective movement, all these ways that we experience self-loss to connect with something much bigger. And I can say more about that in a moment if you like, but I'll just mention the fourth pillar as well, which is storytelling. And that's really the narrative. When I'm talking about storytelling in my book, The Power of Meaning, anyways, it's the narrative that you craft about your own life. So who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? How am I making sense of my experiences? So it's those, belonging, purpose, transcendence, storytelling those were the themes that I saw come up, in the research that I did.
And through your own experience too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Through my own personal experience as well.
Yeah.
And, it definitely was not lost on me that these four pillars of meaning are essentially what, religious and spiritual practices provide. They provide community, they provide a sense of purpose through, if the goal is like enlightenment or freedom from suffering, there are all these practices that we can do. Obviously, opportunities for transcendence in meditation, prayer, things like that, music. And then, offering us narratives about, why we are the way we are, why we do what we do, et cetera. So, so that kind of, those two things, I saw the parallel between, how religion, spirituality can bring meaning and these four pillars. And my hope was that by, putting it in a secular way, that people who maybe don't find meaning or aren't religious, more and more people are agnostic, if there was kind of access points for them through these pillars into leading a meaningful life.
Is that true that more and more people are agnostic at this point? It seems like religion's having a big comeback, at least in the political world. It seems that way.
Yes, in the political world. The last time I looked at the research, my understanding was that yes, like, more and more people are agnostic or, just not involved in religion, not going to religious services, this kind of thing. I think, you also have seen a rise in people who identify as spiritual but not religious.
Sure.
And so I think that speaks to like the yearning that, we have this need for something to help us make sense of the world.
But we also have a country now where they're putting the 10 Commandments in elementary schools.
Yeah.
There seems to be there's a push in both directions. Maybe that's part of the tension that we're experiencing is between somebody else's version of meaning and a more accommodating or open source kind of sense of it. So if you had, I always tell people, creativity, spirituality, and making a buck, pick two. That's from my life as a composer, in which one of my composer friends said when he started a job as a film, writing for a film score or whatever, he'd go up on the blackboard and write fast, cheap, and good. Pick two. of the four pillars, are they equal weight?
That's a great question. So I think it depends on the person. So for some people, transcendence may be the pillar that really kind of fills them up. Think of somebody, becoming a monk, like going to a monastery.
Sure. Yeah.
For other people, transcendence might not be important at all because they derive a lot of sense of meaning from belonging or purpose. So I think it's like, for each person, those pillars are going to be different sizes. I would say that, and you don't necessarily have to have all four, in your life in order to lead a meaningful life. Excuse me. I will say though that, belonging is, if I had to choose one as the most important, we are social creatures. We're born to love and be loved, to care for others, to be cared for. And if you live and you feel like you don't have a sense of belonging with anybody, you don't have valued relationships, you're not part of the community, I think it's going to be pretty hard to feel like you matter, that your life matters.
Do you remember Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles?
Yes.
All the lonely people, where do they all come from?
Yeah,
The
exactly.
loneliness is a very interesting, this idea of community is something that, we're talking a lot about in again, because I'm coming somewhat from a Buddhist framework, is there's the notion of some good teaching, something that is clear and meaningful. But there's a notion of community, Sangha is called.
Yes.
And it's one of the three jewels, and it's some people feel that's the new Buddha. Community, the Sangha is the Buddha. In other words, that the community is going to be the holder of the intelligence of the kind of positive aspirations of the group. But what about this one then on belonging? What about how, because you can belong and then you exclude, right? Those are the two sides of that coin, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And so in my book, I write about, true belonging versus kind of like a cheap imitation. So absolutely, there are institutions, relationships, gangs, cults, religious organizations, political organizations. I mean, you name it, like, groups, I would say, that, are about, inclusion and exclusion and define themselves basically by who they keep out, who they hate, that sort of thing. And in individual relationships too, like if maybe you are valued for how much money you make or what you look like or what you do, and not for who you are. So those, I would lump that as well as kind of a cheap, false belonging. So when I'm talking about belonging, I'm really talking about this sense of honoring and recognizing the other person as a human being, as some a being with dignity and worthy of love. And, and then on the flip side, receiving that feeling from another person. And so I don't think that, the tight, like cult gangs, groups that are defined by inclusion, exclusion are conferring that type of belonging that I'm talking about and writing about.
Do you think it's at all kind of amazing or disturbing that the idea of inclusivity and diversity has become a negative political?
It's interesting.
Isn't that weird that somebody would say, yeah, that's just that junk about including people in a democracy like America? It's do you find that troubling?
It's interesting with, the diversity and inclusion movement. I mean, I think obviously, you want to live in a society that values everybody and that, where everybody feels like they have a place, like they belong. And my understanding of some of the research around kind of diversity movements is that without intending to, they can sometimes, by focusing on the differences between people, erode the capacity for connection. So I think that that's something that I would just be, that I'm aware of. And at the same time, I would say, this kind of wholesale rejection of the values of inclusion and diversity, as kind of like a political motivation, it does make think about what kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a society that that?
Yeah. It's everything can breed its opposite, isn't it true?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I
And
think, oh, go ahead.
no, I was just curious, like, you're a family person, right? You have a
Mhm.
family and children, so forth?
Yes. Yes. I
Yeah.
have 2 kids, married, and we have a third one on the way. So,
Right now?
yes,
Oh,
very much.
congratulations. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Wow.
In the throes of raising young children.
Yeah, wow. Well, of course, do you find that your pillars are dedicated to their future in some way?
Yes. I mean, I think that, raising kids, I mean, it's kind of like, famous among, psychology people like that within the research. Having kids, being a parent is famously associated with low levels of happiness, but with high levels of meaning.
Whoa, wow, that's deep.
Right. Yeah. Because,
Yeah.
like, if you think about it, raising children, like, it requires a lot of effort and patience, and it can be
Mm.
frustrating and it's work. And so, people, when they're, thinking moment to moment, like in these kinds of studies where they're, pinged and asked, okay, what's your mood right now? How do you feel right now? They'll rate themselves as happier when they're doing chores or something on their own than when they're with their kids. But
Wow.
when they're with their kids, they think that that's a meaningful experience. And I think, being part of the family, raising kids is a perfect example of this tension between happiness and meaning because, right, you're like, it's this sense of purpose. You're caring for someone, you're raising a person. There's all the stuff that you do as part of that project. And it's hard, like a job, any job.
Right.
And yet it does bring this sense of meaning because you're caring for another. You are connecting to something beyond yourself, that sort of thing.
Okay, it gets clearer. The word happiness, I think, has enough usages in diverse contexts to really need to be pinpointed. Um, but I think you're using it as a mood ring, like a
Yeah.
temporary experience of. So, how could you define happiness the way you're defining it? Give us some other, you know,
Yeah.
uh, correlatory
So,
words.
like positive emotion, positive affects, there's a couple of ways that happiness is measured in the research. One is this scale called the positive affect, negative affect scale. So it kind of just has you, rate how you feel on a bunch of positive and negative emotional states. Then there's another one that kind of another measure that combines that affective state with an overall an overall evaluation that you make about how satisfied you are with your life in general. And that is called subjective well-being. And it's interesting. I mean, it's called subjective well-being, but the research indicates that it can be more associated with hedonic happiness and capture hedonic happiness
Okay, yeah.
because it's kind of, than something deeper than that. But yes, those are kind of how happiness is defined in the research most often. And then there's a happiness scale where you just ask people, how happy are you, and et cetera, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So the philosophical school would be hedonism in a sense that you're tracking this to. Wasn't that just like
Yeah.
wasn't that the goal there was to just achieve that kind of bubbly, gooey, positive
Yeah.
mental state as much as possible? Doesn't sound that bad today, but anyhow,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I think hedonism is kind of like a harsh word to maybe describe the, happiness. But I do think there is, I think that people who are, pursuing happiness today, who are
Yeah.
searching for happiness, I don't think they're all hedonists. But I do think that, yes,
Mhm.
like hedonism is about maximizing positive feelings, minimizing negative feelings. And there is that aspect of, that is kind of how a lot of people define happiness today.
Could I throw two other words at you while we're, because this is just getting the landscape here. Pleasure, pain. How do
Yeah.
they fit into what we're talking about?
Pleasure, pain. So, pleasure is a type of pleasure is really interesting. I mean, you could define it as a type of positive emotion. Like there are lots of ways we can experience positive emotion. So you can be excited, or you can feel pleasure, or you can be feel calm and at peace. You can be laughing, so it's lots of different ways that you can kind of experience it. And so that's one of them. And I think pleasure, I associate it too with kind of like a physical, there's a strong physical component to it as well. Like people derive pleasure from like eating or, physical intimacy, that sort of thing. So I think, I kind of fit pleasure in with under that happiness bucket. And pain, when I think about some of those activities I talked about earlier that are associated with happiness, like, practicing a musical instrument, or if you're an athlete, or, and you have these goals that you're working towards, like there's pain there, there's physical pain. Sometimes there's emotional pain, in the things that we do with raising kids, for example, right?
Sure.
Like, or being in a relationship, like there's emotional pain. And yet, with meaning, you decide to kind of endure that pain for the sake of this larger thing.
Meaning gives you the bridge to get the gain out of the pain.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. How did you get into all this?
Well, I, had always been interested since I was young in these kind of philosophical questions about, what is a meaningful life. And I grew up in a type of Sangha, but like not, wasn't Buddhist. My parents were Sufis, so they administered a Sufi meditation center from our home. For me, between the ages of around like 6, 7, and 12-ish.
Here or overseas?
In Canada, actually, within Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mean the 51st state, you mean?
Right.
Okay. Sorry, I have to just shed some of that every once in a while just to feel normal,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you were raised in Canada and your parents were Sufis. Wow. And your house was a temple, or did they have a separate space?
It was like a meditation center in our house. Yeah. So like the main floor of the house, people would come and they would sit on the ground and meditate a couple nights a week. And then, we lived on the upstairs. And no, it wasn't, there are lots of, so there are different like orders of Sufism, and my parents were not involved with that particular order. But yes, a lot of kind of, meditating and so meditating. And I mean, a lot of the principles remind me of the principles in Buddhism, like loving kindness and serving others and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that definitely left, this imprint on me as I got older. We moved to the US when I was 12, and we're no longer kind of, administering a Sufi meeting house. And so I kind of began to wonder, how do people find meaning in their lives outside of, spiritual religious pursuits? Like, if you don't believe in God, can you lead a meaningful life? I think, there's this quote by Dostoevsky, if God doesn't exist, then everything is permissible.
Yeah.
Well, is that really true?
Yeah.
And so those kind of philosophical questions led me to studying philosophy in college, and then, psychology in graduate school.
So, tough question, maybe. Are you still a Sufi? Would you consider yourself to be a Sufi?
I wouldn't consider myself to be a Sufi. But I think that, I meditate, and I think, I have I'm definitely kind of have a mystical streak, at heart. But, my family and I attend Episcopal churches. And for me, that's that's a source of, transcendence. And it kind of gives me that spiritual fulfillment that I'm looking for at this stage in my life.
But Sufism is a beautiful tradition.
It is.
It's very refined, in terms of at least these Sufi teachers and practitioners I've met. It's very subtle. It's very nuanced, very refined.
Yes.
It has outer, inner, and secret levels to it,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Wonderful. And if you, this is something that I personally I'm drawn to, is something called pith instructions. Have you ever heard that phrase, pith instruction?
No, I don't think so.
So it would be like in any tradition or any, system of teaching, the one thing that you could say, like you're about to leave this world, and and your kid is there, and you go like, don't forget to, brush your teeth twice a day or whatever it is, So have you heard any good pith instructions in your life? And would you have any to offer? Like just the
Well,
essence of the essence.
yes, I mean, I think, from Sufism, I would say that the pith instruction is love, to love others and to lead with love. And to receive, to be gracious about receiving love. And so I think that is what more can you say?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And what's, I guess what we're all trying to get together as a human group before we get completely replaced by our AI people coming in is, what are we doing here? And
Uh,
I guess that's meaning, isn't it? That would be the pillar of meaning. What are we doing here? How did we get here? What are we doing? What should we leave behind?
yes,
And so the supreme pith instruction in the Sufi tradition is give and receive love.
yes, yes, exactly. And I think, if you're having trouble figuring out what it is that makes your life meaningful, asking yourself something like that, like, what do you want to leave behind? What do you want your children to remember? There was one
Sure,
lesson.
sure.
So, yeah, I like that idea of a pith instruction.
Yeah. So here's an interesting one because I collect them a little bit.
Uh,
So one of the things that I do in my professional life is I play guitar with this gentleman named Krishna Das, who's a
mhm,
a chant meister from the Bhakti tradition, a Western,
cool.
but very very well
Yes.
known in the world. So their teacher, their guru, was this Indian Mahasiddha named Neem Karoli Baba,
Hmm.
known as Maharaji in their tradition. So they're
Hmm.
quoting him. They're talking about what it was like being around him. But one thing he said famously to Ram Dass, who was his sort of
Hmm.
popularizer in the West, uh, and what I take to be a pith instruction. Ram Dass, love everybody and tell the truth.
Yeah.
So what's interesting
Yes.
about that one to me, and Ram Dass, who was a pretty serious about taking this on, so he wasn't
Hmm.
just trying to look good and feel good. Um, said, but Maharaji, the truth is, I don't love everybody.
Yeah. Hmm.
So then they left that for a while. And then I went back and said, well, what did Maharaji say after that?
Hmm.
And he said, Ram Dass, love everybody and tell the truth. Just repeat it. So the juxtaposition between being really clear and sharp and awake
Hmm.
and intelligent and discerning and having some kind of faith that covers it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that interesting to you because you're a scientist, you're you're looking for verification, you're looking for you're saying you're doing a lot of research and you're reading research, which is verifying, right?
Yes. Yes. No, exactly. I think, right. I think that, in an ideal world, like maybe you square that, you know, instruction to love other people and tell the truth by thinking about telling the truth as a way of expressing love. But I'm just, I don't know if that's always the case. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. But to the point of like, well, the truth is I don't love everyone. I think, maybe, and I can certainly identify with that perspective, right? So like
Sure.
you don't, it's hard to love everyone. Like, and
All the time, for sure.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so maybe that is part of just, maybe that's part of like the quest of living a meaningful life is how do we learn how to do that
Mm,
better?
yeah. I mean, what do you think? You're doing your work within a certain sphere. I think everybody's trying to figure out the big picture now. Like, how does it all work
Mhm.
together? Because we're globalizing
Yes.
in the same way that smaller cultures came together to create the great traditions that we have by
Mhm.
merging their assets, so to speak. Now we're
Mhm.
globalizing, and it's causing a lot of like, wait a minute, you say potato, I say potato, over here.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if you looked at the world that we're living in, what advice would you give? Based on your research, is it possible for us to all kind of blend and work together? Is that possible, or are we tribal by nature?
I mean, I think that, if you look at human history, if you look at, psychology research, you have to acknowledge that we are tribal by nature. And I think that if you look at history and if you look at psychology research, what you see is a movement over time towards values of empathy and connectedness and compassion and that sort of thing. So I think both are true.
Yeah. Which means there is some possibility of transcending the tribal, the limiting tribal aspect. The part where you go, this is us and that's them.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I think that there is. Yeah. That certainly. There's a lot of reason to be hopeful that is a place that we could come to. And I think realistically speaking, like I don't know if that tribal instinct will ever be eliminated, to the point of, okay, that we're going to live in a world with no war and no conflict and that sort of thing.
Because when you say research and, verification is part of a good, I think, like in Buddhism, it's very important. Taoism, you got to verify. Buddha was a big deal on verifying. You don't just take my word for it,
Yeah.
So, but when you're doing this, and a lot of the Buddhist teachers, some of the younger Tibetan teachers are doing scientific experiments.
Yeah.
You saw Mingyur Rinpoche with the cover of Time magazine with his brain waves being measured. Does the research indicate that we are basically good or not?
That's such a great question. And I think the research indicates that yes, like we are, different people will read the research differently. I think the research indicates that there is goodness within us, and that is something that is inherent to the human condition. There's all this wonderful research on, young children, toddlers, like wanting them to be, them wanting to be helpful, and even research on infants about them being able to distinguish between right and wrong. And to me, when I try to integrate that research and what it means, it suggests to me that there is some kind of moral sense, within us, and that is directing us towards like goodness. And so, yeah.
The research, obviously you might feel that way as a person, but you're saying that the when people really put it to the test and not a biased look at it, the arrow points a little bit in that direction is what you're saying.
I think, if you look at research by Paul Bloom, for example, a developmental psychologist at Yale, and, people who he's worked with, yes, like there's, he has these wonderful studies where, children, infants, babies will like recognize, good and gravitate towards good,
right,
versus bad, they're like character puppet studies, and how the kids react to them. And so, yeah, I think that's how I'm interpreting the research.
So I don't want to mess up your formulation, but hearing you say that today makes me happy.
Oh, good. Well, you know what? You can be happy and lead a meaningful life. So that's
that's the title right there.
Yeah. Exactly.
Are they looking for another book?
I don't know. Yes.
You can be happy and lead a meaningful life. I like that.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. You might not, but you could also just have one or the other. And so, that's, just be prepared that life can sometimes be meaningful but unhappy. And, ideally it's both.
Right. That and maybe that's a cutting edge going forward. This idea of transcendence, if you don't mind me, just tiptoeing, what's that kid's joke? How can you tell if an elephant has been in your refrigerator? Do you know?
I don't know this joke.
You track its footprints in the cheesecake.
Right.
So just not saying how we got here, but transcendence. I have lived my entire adult life between the music world and the entertainment world and the Dharma of all kinds, the UN of Dharma. I've known shaman and the Sufis and the Hindus and the Bhaktis and the Jews and the Christians. So in Buddhism, we have this kind of twist that is what you're trying to transcend is transcendence, which is sort of why a lot of why the Buddha is touching the earth, like this
Yes.
right here. It's
Yes.
coming
Yes.
back down to the notion of, or the wisdom of no escape, as Pema Chodron said. So is there something to transcend, and would we be better off if we transcended it?
I mean, that's a great question. I love, yes. So like, the Buddha touching the earth and his meditation experience when he, grounds himself in, amidst of kind of the turmoil of his mind. And that is the moment that brings him enlightenment. I mean, I think that one of the things that I love about Buddhism is how it kind of integrates. I mean, I think like it recognizes the beauty of this world, while also recognizing like the suffering that's part of it. So it's like we have to accept what we're given, 10,000 joys, 10,000 sorrows. And we have to accept that because there's beauty here and there's also, sorrow. And so, I love the idea of the bodhisattva, like the one who kind of achieves enlightenment and then comes back to kind of help others. And so I don't know, for some people, maybe they do need to kind of transcend it and feel that oneness with God or whatever. And for other people, like the spiritual practice is being in this messy world and trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. And for you personally, obviously you have a very strong worldly dharma going on there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you relate to the idea of transcendence from within your current portfolio? It's one of your 4 pillars. That's why I'm asking.
It is, yes. And it's for me, it's one of the more important ones. And so, and it's hard, very much when you're raising kids and kind of, trying to build a career and all this kind of stuff to find time to meditate or, this kind of thing. But I think that, in terms, speaking of like being grounded to the earth, there are lots of moments of, transcendence and awe and wonder, just, watching a child or baby figure something out, or, just being outside and hearing the birds, chirping, even if it's just for like a minute, and so these contact points with transcendence throughout the day, I think helps me satisfy that yearning within me.
Yeah. And it keeps it light and luminous, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The mundane can be sprinkled with that kind of
Exactly.
uplifting energy. And so you mentioned career, and I'm curious. So how would you define your career? What is your work? In addition to writing, do you teach? Do you have workshops? Do you have seminars that people could know about? An online presentation? What are you up to as far as your work life?
I'm finishing up a PhD in clinical psychology. And so as part of that, I've been doing, I've been a therapist for the last several years. So I kind of, between writing and like psychotherapy, I would say that's what's defining my professional career right now. And of course I give workshops and seminars. That's how I met Debbie. So kind of all those 3 things, I would say.
You do therapy work one-to-one with people?
I do. Yes, I do. I do.
So since people, you never know who's floating in the ecosystem by here, and what would you direct people towards about what you're doing so they could learn more about it? Obviously, the book, they could get the book.
Yes.
But also, is there a website that you have that we could direct people to learn more about what your work, the work that you're doing?
Yes. So yes, of course, the book, The Power of Meaning. And then my website is my name, EmilyEsfahanismith.com. Okay. And so there I have kind of, an archive of articles and more info about the book and that sort of thing.
And we'll put that in the show notes so everybody can access that. Encourage them to check it out.
That sounds great.
And going forward, any big, I mean, it's hard to say this as somebody who's just about to be a mom again, but do you have like a big picture coming in about your relationship to this current time and place that you find yourself magically in? And is there a big project?
I think that, when I think about my purpose and, the writing that I do, the therapy work that I do, there is so much suffering in the world. And so how can we help people live good lives? Like, in spite of that? How can we heal that suffering as much as we can to lead meaningful lives? And so that's kind of where I see my efforts directed towards.
Wonderful. That's, that we call that the bodhicitta aspiration, the awakened
Yeah.
heart aspiration. And it's certainly a wonderful ground. I think that getting a little glimpse into your, I like to just sort of look at the architecture of somebody's mind. That's sort of my
Yeah.
thing, and how they're shaping their perceptions and so forth. So, what intrigues me and is that you're looking intuitively from an intuitive
Hmm.
heart, but you're also really an architect of like, well, how does this actually work within the mind realm?
Hmm.
So thank you so much. It's been very interesting to get to know you a little bit better. And I want to encourage everybody to take the opportunity to check out your book and your work. And, there's a lot of great talk about, pith instructions. Here's a good one. Keep doing what you're doing.
That you thank you. Well, thank you. And that
Yeah.
is a good one. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And
Yeah.
it's so great to be here to speak with a, kindred spirit about these types of
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
All right, friends, that's a wrap on episode 58 of the CSM Podcast. We want to offer a deep bow of gratitude to Emily for joining us on the program. If you want to dive into the deep end of her work, we'd recommend picking up a copy of The Power of Meaning wherever you order your books. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the show to your friends and family. Don't forget to head on over to dharmamoon.com to check in on the upcoming events, and also the Be Here Now Network for an ocean of wisdom teachings. We will catch you next time. Please stay safe out there.